Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to announce next week's speaker is going to be Deportation War. Nick Bocas will be the speaker. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Lorraine. I'm just here to welcome our speaker, and he can tell you about his story of working in Walnut Way. And I think we should test people for their musician talent before they come to speak. Thank you. Okay, the forum today is The Power We Hold, which is the environmental justice and the fight for energy democracy at Walnut Way. They're working on that project. So welcome, Bryan Rogers.
Yeah, thank you. It's really, really wonderful to be here. I've never been inside this church before, but anytime there's a vaulted room with a grand piano, it's like my top place to be. I love the Unitarians. I don't go to this church, but part of my journey to this point was doing cross-border solidarity work in Latin America and the Caribbean. And part of the model of it was a grassroots US-based human rights organization, and we would do delegations bringing residents, folks from the United States, to come down and witness firsthand the impacts of US foreign policy and corporate practices in places like Honduras, Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua. And the Unitarians were always the ones that locked in the quickest, and the ones that I just felt a certain kindred connection to. So I feel like I'm in a good spot here among the Unitarians. I suppose part of the backstory is important of how I got to here. I was born in Milwaukee, black father, white mother, and went to Catholic school all the way through high school. I went to Marquette University High School, and there was a young Jesuit initiate there in the early 2000s who was connected with a local group called the SOA Watch, and they would take groups of students, anybody who was interested, they would take them in a bus down to Fort Benning, Georgia, where at the time it was known as the School of the Americas, but it was a training facility where the US military would train Latin American security forces in counterinsurgency tactics. And I went down there and actually was with the Unitarian that I got arrested with at the gates. And the buses went home, and I had to stay back for my arraignment, and this Argentine lawyer who was my defense, this man named Marcos. I was young, 15, but he regaled me with the story of the dirty wars in Latin America. And saying all of that to say, fast forward 10 years from then, in 2015, 10 years ago today, in fact, was the first time that I went to Honduras, living in Nicaragua, and crossed the border to Honduras to do a physical accompaniment with a group called COPIN, an indigenous network of Lenca Hondurans that were struggling against the imposition of hydroelectric dams and mining projects all throughout the western part of Honduras. And one of the leaders of that movement, her name was Berta Cáceres. She, 8 months prior to my meeting her for the first time, had been awarded the the Goldman Award for environmentalism. Kind of like the Nobel Peace Prize for environmental justice and human rights defenders. And meeting her and accompanying the struggle that they had been waging for decades against the Honduran state, against private transnational corporations, against, of course, all the ways that the US exerts its influence in a place like the Banana Republic, as it's derogatorily referred to. it was a very intense relationship for about 4 months until she was assassinated by Honduran military police. And so it's coming up on the 10-year anniversary of her murder in March of 2016. And one of the last conversations that we had was her telling me how important it is for the work of Witness for Peace in places like Honduras, to be witnessing how U.S. empire shows up in a place like Honduras, and that as hard as they try and will never stop struggling against those forces, that really the actual struggle, the heart of the struggle, is in the core. And so what she told me was, learn everything that you can while you're here, but then go back home and figure out how you're going to solve the problem at its root. And so to me, I understood that as just like, go back home where I'm from, born and raised, and so that landed me I was going to be a human rights attorney, but then COVID happened, and I feel like I dodged a bullet. I did not become an attorney, and instead joined this graduate program at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee called Sustainable Peace Building. Part of that fellowship opportunity was a placement at a local nonprofit organization, and that organization is Walnut Way. And let me go to this next slide here. Yeah, okay. So Walnut Way has been around for like 25 years, and I will get into the history of the organization and why their history in a neighborhood like Lindsay Heights on the near north side of Milwaukee is extremely relevant. Actually, you know what? Let me go back. Thank you for showing me the back button, George. Because when we initially talked about this talk, which Mark also mentioned to me, don't let them ask questions. I really am uncomfortable speaking to a group of people. Would much rather it be a dialogue. But I'm gonna respect your wishes, Mark, and not open it up for commentary.
It's your presentation, so if you want to do it that way, it's perfect.
Okay. But we had talked about the work that Walnut Way does in the regulatory justice space and around energy burden and around building alternative solutions to the affordability crisis that 90% of the people who live in Lindsay Heights face. Part of Mark's comment to me was like, well, Alex Brower, now Common Councilman Alex Brower, had recently done a talk in front of y'all talking about very, very similar work. And so perhaps find a separate issue or a complementary issue to discuss. And so I changed the title without letting anybody else know from energy democracy or whatever it was before to eco-societal transformation and community self-determination. And I feel like those terms are very much act as a compass for the work that we're involved in at Walnut Way. And let me go forward. The reason being that I was talking to Danica, one of the parishioners, and she was saying that the lecture or the homily, I'm not sure what the Unitarians call it, was about hope in the time of crisis or hope in the darkness of democracy. And I do feel like we're all experiencing versions of the crisis in our own way, and that there are multiple crises happening at once. And I've heard it referred to as polycrisis, I've heard it referred to as a general crisis. I feel like the important thing for us to recognize is that all of these crises are very much in dialogue with one another, and that there is, in fact, a common root to all of the destabilization and the destruction that we see around us. And so whether we're looking at the sectoral crisis in our economy or the crisis of our politics, or the crisis of democracy, or whether we're looking at the crisis in social reproduction and care work, how we're able to take care of one another, or we look at the crisis in to our environment, right? The ecological destruction. And this, I suppose, is what my education, learning about the School of the Americas in the early 2000s, and then doing political work in the so-called Global South, in Latin America and the Caribbean, is that the analysis of social movements who are fighting against extremely repressive, authoritarian governments, and often those governments were imposed by the United States to defend United States economic interests, that the way that they refer to the struggle of environmental justice, they in fact don't use that terminology. They are extremely clear politically in their diagnosis of the things that they are fighting against, which they explicitly, they're anti-capitalist, they're anti-patriarchal, they're anti-racist, and they're anti-imperialist. And each one of those are, of course, in conversation with one another, but then they're also very explicit and clear about what they are for, right? They are for gender equity, they are for territorial sovereignty, they're in favor of a number of other things which we will get to. But I think the term cannibal capitalism that I put up top comes from a political philosopher, Nancy Fraser, and her main argument is that all of these sectoral crises are in conversation with one another, and all of them have a common root, that is capitalism. And so you see the photo there, it's a picture of the Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. And the basic idea there is that there are these separations that our economic system would like to make, capitalism. In fact, we talk about it as an economic system, but it's actually much, much more pervasive than just an economy. It is a social order, an institutionalized social order, and that part of the ways that it reproduces itself and the ways that it makes possible its own ability to accumulate wealth and to generate profit is from all of these background conditions that enable profit accumulation. And those background conditions are nature, and so capitalists are incentivized to exploit the land, to take advantage of it, and are not required at all to replenish it or to repair it or to restore that which they take. Similarly, with racialized populations, capitalists are understood to be able to take advantage of labor, whether they are expropriating it wholesale in the case of forms of slavery, or whether it's wage work, which is its own form of exploitation, and that both of them they require each other. It's another background condition for economic capital accumulation. A third sphere is social reproduction. All of the ways that if my mom didn't raise me and my two brothers, if we didn't have a home to be in and food to eat and education, I would not have been able to be a worker capable of being exploited. And so like the fact that, and that is work that's never really qualified as work or paid for as such. And so it's another way that capitalist accumulation cannibalizes care and social reproductive work. And then finally, the last area is our politics. And I think we see this very, very clearly in the struggles, in Walnut Way's particular case, with the Public Service Commission, trying to make arguments to our regulators, whose whole job it is to regulate in favor of the public, and yet they can't do that effectively. And why is that? Well, because monopoly utilities wield an extraordinarily disproportionate amount of power because of the capital that they have accumulated that allows them to effectively capture regulatory systems, right? The political system wholesale. And capitalist frameworks would not be able to achieve the wealth that they achieve without a political system, without a legal order, without a way to enforce contracts, without, right? And so it's another area where capitalist accumulation, it requires a political system, but yet it feeds and cannibalizes that political system. And so we get what we're witnessing and experiencing now, which is a vicious rise in right-wing authoritarianism. All over, right? Not just in the United States. And so part of what Berta Cáceres back in 2016 was trying to tell a much younger version of me was like, yo, like, try and identify what the root cause of all of this violence and destabilization is. It is rooted in a social order that is itself rotten to the very core. And if the threat of climate catastrophe and the fact that our life support systems are literally on their last, like, and they just had the Conference of Parties in Belém, Brazil, COP30, and not once did they mention fossil fuels, right? Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was like bragging because the fossil fuel industry got a huge boon. And yet the indigenous protesters in the Amazon that showed up to try and shut it down, there is a structural imbalance between whose concerns are responded to.
And another example of capture.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we have an institutionalized social order that is feeding on itself and that produces these crises. And I think now we're at an inflection point where across all of the sort of background conditions that it cannibalizes, we are seeing what is like a very generalized crisis. So it's bad, and there is, in my opinion, a tremendous amount of revolutionary optimism that we can draw from the current state of affairs. And so I'm hoping we'll have some time to talk about data centers, because this is one of the places where I see actually the most pregnant possibility for mass, like social-wide unity around the issue. So I think it's clear enough why the systems must change. Yes, why they must change. And so our position at Walnut Way is like, there is the things that people need in order to survive and to just have a basis for social reproduction, to have a basis for just leading a dignified, fulfilling life. Those things should never be centers of profit. The fact that they are, well, I mean, yeah, we know how that goes. And so we're of the belief that whether it's water, housing, food, energy, Wi-Fi access, transportation, none of these things should be allowed to be victimized by the logics of the market. So Walnut Way, very early on, and somebody give me at 10:30. Okay.
Just mentioning,
Yeah.
there's a clock up there, but
Yeah.
10, 15 minutes, and then some people will want to leave for 11 o'clock.
Absolutely.
They might have some questions before they go.
I'm gonna blow through this. Yeah.
The whole plan.
No, it's not. My original plan was actually just to have a dialogue and not do, but yeah. Okay, so very briefly, Walnut Way, it started back in the year 2000. There are multiple narratives for, how it started, who started it, but I think there's agreement that like some neighbors got together, they were like, wow, there are no trees on the block, this is awful. They planted some tulips, the tulips then became an orchard, the orchard then was next to a house that they that had been like a trap house, a drug house. They they gutted it down to the studs and built it back up. It became a community center. And there was urban agriculture, there were greenhouses and beehives, and there was just like a buzzing, vibrant sort of spirit of we can do anything if we do it together. And it was called Walnut Way Conservation Corp, and the thing that they were conserving was the neighborhood, right? It's a historic neighborhood. Black people have been living in that neighborhood for 80, 90 years, and it is the site of a lot of cultural pioneers that have come from that neighborhood. It's a 90% black neighborhood. The highway went straight through the neighborhood. Some of y'all are old enough to remember that. And the course of its evolution, they expanded to say, well, okay, residents that are here, they should be able to leverage the infrastructure of the organization to be able to carry out their own dreams and aspirations. And so there was a concerted effort to do what is called community wealth building, to say, residents, if you have an idea about how you want to transform your relationship to the block, to the neighborhood that you live in, whether you want to clean up some garbage on the side of the road, or whether you want to give a Tai Chi class to some neighbors, if you can get 5, 10 neighbors in a room to say yes to this, we will figure out a way to fund this idea. And I think it was a really, really beautiful idea. Always, though, like, motion only happens through contradiction. There were a lot of contradictions. And so one of the things that we learned was that, and especially in a neighborhood like Lindsay Heights, that, like, for people who are not from there, and it's the neighborhood that I grew up in part of the time because my grandmama's house was on 12th and Wright. It's where my dad currently lives now with my Uncle Russell. That, like, if you're not from the neighborhood, the thing that you know about Lindsay Heights is that it's 53205, 53206. So it's, you know about the Kia Boys, or you know about, like, the socioeconomic indicators that it's, it's like worse than Detroit in a hyper-segregated city like Milwaukee. The things we know about the neighborhoods on the north side, whether it's Metcalf or Amani, is like, not a place you want to go. And yet, on every single block in the 110 square blocks of Lindsay Heights, there is an immense, extraordinarily potent amount of capability and promise and acumen and historical knowledge. And despite the fact that it has been divested in, despite the fact that it has been subjugated to hyper-surveillance and hyper-militarization, despite the fact of, like, all the things that make it the bad place that it might be, there are people on every single block who are standing up, locking arms, and saying, this is our neighborhood. We're not going anywhere, and it is a place that people want badly, right? The downtown district expanded itself maybe 18 months ago out to 27th and Capitol. It's a 10-minute walk from the Pfizer Forum to Lindsay Heights. It is prime real estate. So the way philanthropic entities in the city have been moving, the way that the city itself, the Department of City Development, has been moving, the way that entities like the Community Development Alliance have been moving is in ways that for residents living there and who have lived there their entire lives and who own their homes but cannot afford when the assessments go up to be able to make the taxes to pay for those homes, or don't have the proper deed set up to be able to pass it on to their progeny, and because they know their history, they're terrified. And they're getting calls every day from people who say, I'll buy your house. The neighborhood is under threat, in other words, and people know it. And people are organizing to be able to better understand what the actual threat condition is and what pathways, solutions out of it, which brings us back to self-determination. How does a community that is been thoroughly pummeled by a social order that just only knows how to extract for the profit of a very, 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 very small few, how does a community like that survive? Because it's not different. The mechanisms of extraction and exploitation, of violence, of surveillance, of demonization in the media, it's not any different than what the Hondurans in the mountains, the indigenous folk, were fighting against and are still fighting against now. To be able to see those connections is extremely, for me, a sense of optimism. To say like, ooh, there are people all over the world who are experiencing the same kind of dispossession, who are experiencing the same kind of subjugation, and have never stopped resisting it, have never stopped organizing around it. And the opportunity that I feel like we have to stand in like really activated solidarity with one another, I think has never been more feasible than it is today. And so the conservation of the neighborhood, the protection of Lindsay Heights neighborhood, I think the organization was experiencing like, oh, there are limits to the extent that we can be successful in conserving the neighborhood if we aren't also engaging in a political struggle because of all the threats that I've mentioned. And so EJII, the Environmental Justice and Infrastructure Initiative, a mouthful that we're in the process of changing, it was birthed at Walnut Way to be this initiative to say like, all right, let's get involved in the energy struggle to be able to take care of energy affordability. This can be a site of struggle that can help alleviate some of the precarity, the intentional precarity that people in the neighborhood have to suffer through. They live in old homes, right? They're not weatherized. The disconnections and shutoffs and the blackouts happen there more than they happen anywhere else in the city of Milwaukee. So, all right, let's focus on energy burden. Let's focus on energy justice. That struggle, though, like whether we're fighting in rate cases to try and keep We Energy's profits lower and that they're not cost shifting onto residents because everybody's bills been going up, or whether we are fighting against the imposition of fossil fuel projects, methane gas plants in Racine and Kenosha, or whether we are, as we are right now, intervening in the Public Service Commission to prevent We Energy's and our tech overlords, Microsoft's and OpenAI and Vantage, from exploiting the speculative bubble that is the AI data center boom. Those are all vital struggles. Those are things we have to resist. And yet, there is a structural limitation to the extent to which we can be successful in those realms. And recognizing that, as important as it is to resist, to block, that we also have to be building actively the solutions that are viable, that are happening in other places, and making sure that our attention is focused in proportional ways. So, going forward, recognizing that, well, yeah, we'll just go forward here. So, we are changing from EJII, the Environmental Justice and Infrastructure Initiative, to something else. And this was a process that has been informed collectively. And so we're becoming this thing called the web. Let me be the person reading off the slide to you, but Walnut Way taught us what's possible when communities organize for themselves. We've already talked about the crises. They are structural, global, and they're getting worse. And so deeper organizing, stronger political alignment, and some shared movement infrastructure.
What does the web stand for?
I'm glad you asked. Oh, okay. It got a little wonky there, but the web it stands for Wisconsin Eco-Justice Base Builders. So there's a territoriality to it, Wisconsin. There is a concept of eco-justice, which we can break down later. But the base building part, I think, is actually the most important part of it. It's just to say that there is no solution that's coming from the top. Nobody is coming to save us. Communities, whether it's DeForest or Port Washington or Janesville or Menominee, are learning in real time, and these are not liberal bastions, these are not progressive places necessarily. Some of them are pretty explicitly MAGA-oriented. But what they're learning real time is that there is no locale that is exempted from the predation of private corporations' need to satisfy their shareholders. Nobody's exempt. And so these communities are now experiencing that in, unfortunately, violent ways. If anybody heard or saw on the news what happened to a very calm and gentle woman named Christine Lejeune in Port Washington, at a common council meeting, saying how opposed she and the thousands of people who signed her petition are against the imposition of this data center that nobody asked for, that is going to raise their bills, that is not going to solve the fiscal, crisis of the city. The police violently took her to the ground and arrested 2 of the individuals that were trying to intervene on her behalf. And so for me, when I see something like that happening to, frankly, a upper middle class white woman in a relatively conservative place like Port Washington, that's nobody's exempted. And the state and their coercive, violent apparatus through the police and the sheriff's department, who are they acting on behalf of? Not the residents who showed up to voice their complaints around how undemocratic the process was, or how much they do not want 24-hour construction of a facility that is going to take 10 years to build and will never repay itself. And there's, it's absurd to think that results in a violent arrest of a woman calmly speaking the truth to elected officials. But it's a warning, right? It's to say that what was happening in Honduras under a narco dictatorship that the United States installed in that country to protect its own interests, its own economic interests, the boomerang has come back home. And so nobody from the top is going to save us. Nobody's coming to save us. It's going to be us, or it's going to be no one. Building a base of support and of political analysis to say, whatever you are suffering, whether it's like you're up north and your ability to go fish is being harmed because of the PFAS in the water, or you are living in an urban environment and your lights keep getting cut off and there are no trees in your neighborhood, so it's 10 degrees hotter in the summer than it is 8 blocks away, is to say that there is a deep commonality in the suffering that we experience, and therefore there's a transformative potential in coming together to be able to talk about what it's like to live under these conditions. So, shared strategy, shared infrastructure, and shared political power. Likewise, these principles have been generated over time and collectively. And I'll stop the thing there, because I feel like there's, how many more? There's 1, 2, okay, yeah, that's it. Oh shoot, I don't know what I did, George. But anyway, I really would like to stop talking. Yeah, and, exactly. Thank you. But maybe if you could full screen this just so that it's, yeah. I don't know if I can do it from here. Or even if you go up to that from the beginning in the top left under file. Yeah. And then I can just push it over. Yeah. Oh, yes, behind the mic. Oh, is that Bruce? I see Bruce. Yeah. 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 And so the question was,
Against everything status quo.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So just to repeat it for the folks online, a sense of a little daunting, and what is how are we going to achieve, right, transformation, societal transformation, and what is the solution to be able to take care of? And so I think that the bottom up, the transformative, I think we have to start as small as possible, but have an extremely global perspective. And I think Lindsay Heights is actually a really, really good example that like the kind of projects that we are piloting, I'll give two examples. One is through Wi-Fi. And so we had, ironically enough, a partnership with Microsoft some years ago where we learned some things that, though the partnership is no longer, we are implementing. So we learned how to build infrastructure, and through a bridge network, we are building a decentralized Wi-Fi network where if you are in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood, you will have access to free, quality, affordable Wi-Fi. There's a digital divide, right? The companies who operate in the broadband space are capitalist entities, and sometimes that's not great for everybody. And so what that opportunity presents is, I would say, threefold. One is meeting somebody's basic needs. And there's no question that in 2025, you need access to the internet. So that's one, right? If we can provide a service to somebody that is going to immediately improve their material conditions, that's a win. But two, that becomes a portal to being able to have conversations with people on the block, right? I'm having conversations with people that run the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or with people that run the Welford Sanders apartment complex, and we need tall buildings with a lot of roof space so that we can put the main infrastructure so that we have access points to then be able to go down into people's units and homes. But it becomes an incredible organizing opportunity, right? To say, like, we as a community, we have a solution to what is a problem that is definitional a part of the capitalist social order. There's another way to do this. There's a cooperative way to do this. There's a community organizing way to do this. And to say, all right, well, by the end of the year, we're going to have installed over 100 different antennas and thousands of dedicated routers in people's homes, and they will be able to enjoy access to free, quality Wi-Fi. And that will be a cooperative, right? So the way we're going to run the business, both from the consumer side of things and from the worker side of things, right, the installation, the maintenance, the customer service, is going to be a solidarity enterprise, a cooperative enterprise. So I think that's one powerful example of, and it's 1,000,001 experiments, right? It's not without its contradictions, but that is a living, breathing project that people are already accessing the Wi-Fi. The second one is around energy sovereignty. And it's us, though we're toe-to-toe with the Public Service Commission every day, we also did get money from the Public Service Commission to do a feasibility study to build out 1 megawatt of utility scale investment grade solar. And so this is an opportunity, again, like just for community education, it's an opportunity to organize on the block, but it's also like a real potential pathway in partnership with the county or in partnership with what MPS as they're consolidating their schools, and a lot of them in Lindsay Heights are going to close, and what are they going to do with the buildings, and there's so much roof space there, right? It's a huge opportunity to have a discussion around how are we going to meet another basic essential need, electricity, but do it in a way that doesn't require the exploitation of the land or the exploitation of people's labor. And so that's another cooperative enterprise that it is very much in utero, but we'll be done with the feasibility study in 2 weeks. And that becomes an opportunity to then figure out how we're going to get the capital stack right to be able to build the thing out. And that is, I would say, and so these are micro examples, right? It's 6,000 people that live in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood. But I think that's part of the theory of change, right? That like, we have to figure out for ourselves how we're going to survive what I would call like a pretty cataclysmic and like apocalyptic global scenario that we're in. Everything's failing. So we'll figure out how to build the alternative as the thing crumbles around us. And we're doing it, you know? Bruce, and then in the back.
I just want to emphasize to everybody in the audience, this is not a pipe dream. Walnut Way Conservation Corporation has been one of the most successful community development corporations, certainly in the city, and it's got a national reputation. So don't sell these ideas short. We had a wonderful tour this summer of Lindsay Heights, and we saw what he's talking about, and this is real stuff. It is, and so if you get a chance to work through the state corporation that gives tours of environmental places.
Right.
Natural Resources
Yeah.
Foundation. I suspect there'll be another tour this summer.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful chance to see what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I forgot that happened. Yeah, that's cool. Here, and then the man in the back.
I was wondering how you see getting involved in the web among those of us in today. Are there volunteer opportunities?
Okay, so nobody else in the world knows that it's the web. Y'all are the first. And this was like the dry run of like trying to introduce it. I got some tweaking to do. But, okay, so there is an event, or like a 2-day gathering from the Wisconsin Climate Action Navigators. It's run out of the out of the Department of Administration and the Office of Clean Energy and Sustainability. But they're hosting their regional gathering January 14th and 15th, and that will be like the public launch of the web. But volunteers, absolutely. It's an all hands on deck situation, you know? So we are extremely welcoming. They're like, to Bruce's point, they're like thinking about the tours. Like, we have almost 3 acres of urban garden, and a lot of it is underutilized. And some of that's just been a capacity issue, and some of it has been like mission creep into other areas of advocacy and organizing work. And I say that to say that there's a lot of, there are things that can be activated within the Walnut Way ecosystem that and the urban agriculture and the food sovereignty issue is a really, really important one for me. Maybe that wasn't explicit enough. I don't have a, yeah. I'm in the back.
Okay, I think you mentioned that at least some of the members of the Public Service Commission are conflicted about who they represent. Does the public have any input into who's chosen for that commission?
Only insofar as we have input into who becomes our governor. So the 3 public.
Keepers to be nominating people that represent the public.
It's unfortunate, you know, like so the question is, the public service commissioners, do we have any say in how they become public service commissioners? And yeah, they're appointed by the governor, so
But approved,
there are others
but approved by the Senate.
confirmed.
He
Yeah.
nominated Sharon Adams.
Did he? I did not know that.
Oh, no, that's DNR.
Okay, that's right.
DNR.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like, Governor Evers is a co-chair of the Climate Alliance. You know, this like body of governors and public officials. And yet, you know, I don't think that the environmental or the climate movement has been explicit enough in actually naming the ways that Governor Evers has undermined some of the efforts of the climate and environmental justice movement. And that's, again, like, yeah. I think that there's so much politics at play, and Bruce is right, that like Governor Evers can name 3 individuals, and one of them might have the moral courage or the moral imagination to vote in service of the public as opposed to in service of the utilities, but because the confirmation power rests in the legislature, and it's been a right-dominated legislature, the moment that a public service commissioner votes out of step with utility interests, they call a vote of a commissioner who served for 4 years, voted in favor of a rate cap for low-income customers, and was summarily dismissed.
So another reason for us to focus on the state legislature and get everything right.
And the governor's race, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard at a PSC hearing from a state senator was that the 2 commissioners who were listening at that meeting wouldn't be confirmed if they accepted the project,
Right.
if they didn't accept the project.
Yeah, and I feel like when it comes to the political question, and this is something that that is sort of enumerated in these principles, is that I don't want too much of my ideological slip to show here, but I just think we have to be very, very discerning and cautious when it comes to how we actually interact with the state. And not because it's not populated by individuals who really care and want to do the right thing, but because structurally, the way it is currently, it is not designed to be able to deliver justice really in any sense. And even in the extent that it does, it's extremely limited. And anything that we can legislate away, you know? And so it's just like, it's not, in terms of our theory of change at the web, it's that we have to be able to build bottom-up solutions and to really be able to, it's what is often referred to as dual power, which is to say, like, we have a relationship with the state, it's tactical. We will take the PSC's money to build out solar in our community without any, right? But we can't give the state too much deference. And for me, that's really empowering, as opposed to, like, the state has and does, whether it wants to or not, it abandons communities, right? It leaves, like, Katrina is a really, really good example, right? We just celebrated or, commemorated 20 years. You couldn't ask for a better object lesson in the way that a community is literally left behind and left to drown. And so I just, like, for communities where that is the status quo, right, where that is the thing that you can expect from the state, it does make a lot more sense to say, like, okay, well, yeah, we have to figure out our own solutions. We will have tactical alliances with power as it serves our interests, but an over-reliance on the political system to solve what is not a political problem, I think we have to be really clear on that. The problem isn't political. The problem is that we have a social order that, in order to extend itself, requires it has to take over the political system. So, I don't know I hope that addresses it, but, and then this is the last one. And really just because I like the picture.
Can I make a suggestion that maybe the web can do some governor's candidates forums
Yeah,
coming up? We've got a big election coming up
Yeah.
next year, and publicizing some of the points of view of the candidates
yeah.
would be a real useful sort of gift to the electorate, if you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the formations that we're a part of is it's a statewide clean economy coalition, and there's about 50 plus member organizations, and that is one of their central campaigns for 2026. They're calling it the Race to the Top campaign, to get gubernatorial and just to get candidates for public office to basically one-up each other on what they are going to do, right, in order to advance 100% clean energy is the main thing of that coalition. But yeah, we're planning at least one in June or July with all the gubernatorial candidates at Walnut Way, or it'll probably be at North Division. But that's a really, really good, and again, I think it's a really, really powerful opportunity for base building mostly, to educate the candidates, yes, but really around how are we going to through people's assemblies, right? And we view what does mass organizing actually look like? You need 20%, minimally 20% of whatever your geographic target is. You need 20% of the people who live there to actively participate in shaping not what the decisions are, but even what are the questions on the table, right? I feel like that's so much of what ends up limiting us is now that we just live, we get news via algorithm. Even the issues on the table are almost pre-decided for us. This is something that's coming up in the data center issue. The utility wants this tariff. They want a new customer class for data centers, very large users is what they refer to it as. And without getting too much into the weeds, that's for our attorneys to do, it is egregious. What We Energies wants, the kind of cost shifting it's willing to do, the kind of it is the worst deal in the country. And the consequences of a decision like that, because it's the largest utility in Wisconsin and because it's the first case of its kind, the stakes are tremendous. And I will say then, the data center struggle is, in my mind, currently the best vehicle we have to do really coordinated grassroots base building. Again, because there are so many communities who are fighting this that are being activated in ways that provide an opening for them to consider other ideologies or to consider other, political pathways forward. And so it really excites me at the same time as it terrifies me because of what I started off with, the Berta Cáceres story, right? Where it's when people stand in very clear analysis of the situation and are not afraid to call it out and are powerfully organizing people alongside them, it becomes a very serious threat. And there's enough loud historical examples that we know that when capital and power feel threatened, what they resort to. And so that playbook opened up in Port Washington last week, Monday. And so oh no, that's the one, Popular Assembly. Yeah, I just like that picture too. So.
Jody Heather-Stinnigan has introduced a bill in the Senate called
The data center bill. Accountability.
Bill, which might be a vehicle.
It might be, but so I guess this is a really good example of how where the politics plays out in ways that I think blunt more progressive or just more, I don't know. The pathway that bill took came from Minnesota. They said, all right, they did it in Minnesota. It was bipartisan, so bet. Let's see what we can do in the Wisconsin context. Different political terrain, but okay. 70% is what they set the threshold at. Communities, whether it's DeForest, Menominee, Port Washington, Caledonia, where they successfully kicked Microsoft out, they read the bill at an organizers meeting that we had, and they were like, wait, what? This is the solution? This is the political solution? And I say that to say it's the bill is more conservative, and because they were trying to make sure that they didn't piss labor off too much, right? They thought that we were gonna be able to get labor in on this, which is the bill needs work. The bill will be worked on, but I think we should have our eyes wide open to the fact that there are political solutions that are more conservative because they're more pragmatic, because they have a better chance of passing than the conservative communities, right? That's crazy to me, which is another reason why like top down is not going to work. You'd have to go and talk to Prescott Balch in Caledonia. You'd have to go and talk to Christine Lejeune in Port Washington. You'd have to go and talk to, right, the organizers on the ground to say, what should this bill look like? They have to be the ones to write it. They're the ones experiencing directly the threat of the thing the bill purports to solve. So, and there's an immense amount of potential as these, as these solutions or bills pop up. It's every single one is an opportunity to reset and be like, okay, where's power actually coming from? Who are they solving the problem for? Who got to be in the room to make the decision? And so every single one is like, I think we will see this, especially with the data center grassroots movement, it will grow. And it will incorporate more, different tendencies, and it will be like a rainbow of possibilities to like, how are we going to advance community self-determination as a political project across geography, across race, across class. Like, it's happening, and it's really, really exciting. But I think we just always have to go back to, like, where is the source of power? It's us, We have all the power. So, George?
Sure. You mentioned earlier about some of the things that's in that area. The Social Development Commission is in that area as well.
It's gone.
Yeah, it's gone, but work with the NAACP.
Yeah.
We've been working with the Social Development Commission to try to provide those services for the community.
Yeah.
And one of the things that in a meeting a few nights ago, the buildings itself, I believe, is owned by a arm of Walnut Way, and that's real estate arm.
Yeah.
And from what we understand, we're looking to give some support to that real estate arm of Walnut Way.
Yeah.
To depossession of those buildings. I think they already own them, that sort of thing.
So, yeah.
We can provide those services, and they can be administered from that same location in that area. I didn't know if you had any insight on that or not. You may not.
I'm getting into real estate only because I realize like everything is only ever a land struggle. But my politics have, up until this point, prevented me from wanting anything to do with private property or ownership. But we have been in negotiations, and the goal is to have site control of it and to be able to get tenants in there. Again, though, I think like I'll just be like lazy and say like everything needs to be a cooperative. Everything needs to be like under a public or like a community land trust, and the people who are living in the place need to have an active participating role in like, what do we need this development for? How should this space be used? And so I think as much as it is a very real possibility that Walnut Way will have site control and like actually do development on the old STC site, the like what the philosophy of land use, like that is really it's just really important to be thoughtful about.
If services were restored to SDC, would you consider that to be in line with
I think so, like, because people do need like access. Like when they left, right? There are all these neighbors in Lindsay Heights who are like, okay, well, where am I going to go to get my weatherization done? Like, how am I going to get my taxes? And all of that is moved, right? UMOS has all those contracts now. And here's another thing that I didn't mention that I think also has a very liberatory potential, is the Neighborhood Improvement District. So it's a quasi-municipality. The Lindsay Heights Neighborhood Improvement District it has levy authority, right? So it like assesses and collects $50 from every homeowner, like from every owned property in the neighborhood. And they've pooled those funds and leveraged it to get some grant dollars. And they are an elected body. There are 6 board members. And it is like, right, you gotta live in the neighborhood to sit on the Neighborhood Improvement District. And it was incubated at Walnut Way, and now is, Walnut Way is the fiscal for the NID. And it's been very, very messy, very, very messy. But it's like, it's what's necessary, right? We have to figure out how we're going to make decisions together. And everybody's carrying their whole lives with them, right? Of trauma and abuse and neglect and failed dreams and the desire for power and ego. And so like, as much as we're saying like, oh, we're trying to build a new world, equally important, which is why political education and like healing work is such a vital part of being in space together, is like, we have to be committed to becoming new people, you know? Like, how are we actually going to share our resources together? How are we going to build a mutual aid society? How are we going to like, and so, that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but I feel like service delivery is like, it's not adequate enough. Like, we don't want charity, we don't want people coming to like, we don't want a welfare system. We want a community that can, using the resources that it has and the relationships that it has, be able to take care of itself on its own terms. And so there is an element of like the Social Development Commission or just like CAP agencies in general that are necessary because they're responding to, right, a manufactured need for services. But that's not the world we want. We don't want a world where we need a low-income assistance payment program. We want a world where like you don't have to pay to heat your home, right? We want a world where like we are going to use the abundant advanced technology that we have to like, we could build houses and we could use like fabrication labs to actually produce our own materials in the neighborhood and reduce our dependency on like hyper-exploitative and volatile supply chains. All of that's like totally in the realm of possibility. It requires coordination and it requires a commitment to like, I'm going to be humble and I'm going to, not humble, I will live with humility and like commit myself to personal transformation in a collective way. That was too soapboxy, but I you know, yeah.
Just one last question. I believe it's the founders of Walnut Way is a
Yeah.
husband and wife couple.
There you
They
go.
actually were at our forum, like that's probably been like 10 years ago.
Okay.
I can't remember their name.
Sharon and Larry. Yeah. Legends, absolute legends.
What's the name again?
Sharon and Larry Adams.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And they live across the street from the Walnut Way house, and they, there's a place that they started called Adams Garden Park on 19th and Fond du Lac, and there used to be a bunch of organizations, now it's the Milwaukee Water Commons, it's their home base. But yeah, Sharon and Larry, like they birthed that as well. Yeah. And I will say, like, as powerful as, and as well respected as they are, I do think that there is yeah, I'll call it what I think it is. I think there's a generational, like, as the crisis widens and deepens, I think that there are generational currents to the understanding of the crisis and therefore solutions on the way out of it that are, what we're doing requires bold imagination, and like not totally inventing new things, because there are a lot of things that we should be returning to in terms of like ways of being together, practices, ecological, right? But there is not time for us to be messing around with like half measures or like slow reforms. There's not. And I have kids, you know, like my 15-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 2-year-old, like I don't know if the world I'm trying to win is winnable in my lifetime, but it's gotta be in theirs, or if they decide to have children, in theirs. So, but it won't be if like we're always only playing politics and trying to shift the Overton window just a little bit here, try and pass that bill there. It's just like, we have to, it really is gonna require some radical movement, some revolutionary movement, and without that, we're playing in our own face.
One of the things I remember them sharing, kind of an innovative approach, I thought, at the time, and especially now, I imagine, is that you had mentioned like a trap house being like in a community on the block.
Yeah.
Their approach was, how do we go and talk to these drug dealers and see if we can work out some level of,
Yeah.
you know, maybe not in front of kids, maybe, you know,
Yeah.
whatever they may be able to do to be able to like survive together in that community, even though that's an approach that's something they're doing that you don't want in a community.
Yeah.
But rather than calling the police and
Yeah, and not only coexist, but like there are numerous examples at Walnut Way. It has a social enterprise called Blue Skies Landscaping, and they do green infrastructure work. And part of the philosophy of that entity has been trying to address what you just brought up, George, which is like how are we going to lower barriers to employment, meaningful employment, for people who would otherwise choose different pathways. And like personally, like my dad, he was like selling drugs he was like, why would I not do that? It's like there are no other viable pathways for me. I could make so much money doing this, and he did. And like the trip to Hawaii was amazing when I was 10, but it ended, right, at some point. And so then I missed having him for a very important part of my own development. And so what's our workforce pathway? What's our plan for that? How are we actually, that's another reason why volunteering and cooperative economics and figuring out ways that yeah, that's a beast of a problem. But equally, it's something that I think there's a lot of possibility there. And again, I really appreciate what you're saying, or maybe what the founders were saying, which is we can't just erase this or cage this away. We have to coexist with this, because this is the reality as we're trying to transform it. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about just disposability, and how just so much of our system is just we can just ignore or get rid of or cage or just dispose of this or that. We do it with our products, we do it with people. It's just yeah.
Do you have partners in Milwaukee that you're excited to work with, that you're working with now, organizations?
Yeah, I mean, so the Party for Socialism and Liberation, they're down the block. They just opened up on 19th in North. In fact, I'm going there after this to meet with some other organizers from Metcalf Park, so I mean, and honestly, on the north side, the original steering committee, before it was the web, was community-based organization leaders all across the north side. So it was Sherman Park Community Association and Northwest Side CDC, and I think a lot of the conversation lately has been, how do we federate in a way? How are we, because everybody talks about silos, and it's we don't actually, people exploit the silos, right?
Right.
And I think I especially see that from the philanthropic community. But it's we work together all the time, right? Whether it's with the Dominican Center or, with SOC on the south side, or so.
With the neighborhood houses of Milwaukee.
Yeah. So I think so much of it comes down to how are we going to coordinate capacity?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's the nonprofit industrial complex that is really a problem, Nonprofits should, in my opinion, be trying to organize themselves out of existence, and organize themselves into more democratically governed, they should be co-ops. They should be worker, self-management. Yeah. So we're locked up on that. Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.